Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case, copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello and welcome to my rebuttal of the May 2016 JW Broadcasting episode, which is hosted by none other than Tony Morris. Take it away, Tony.
The family unit is under a vicious attack in these last days. The Insight book lived up to its name under the heading Family. The very insightful comment reads this way: the inspired scriptures have foretold a vicious attack on the family institution, with a consequent breaking down of morality and of human society outside the congregation.
I would agree that the family unit is indeed under a vicious attack these days, but I'm not sure that cults that mandate shunning and the breaking apart of families for religious reasons are helping the problem.
Family life in these critical last days could be likened to those who suffer from diabetes. It is believed that diabetes is caused by both genetic and environmental factors. Similarly, all in the family have inherited sin and imperfection from our first human parents, Adam and Eve, as if genetically. However, we are also exposed to the ever more toxic environmental factors of Satan's evil world. Most who suffer from a serious case of diabetes need to use two methods to successfully relieve the symptoms and lead a normal life. They have to watch their diet and, in many cases, take an injection of insulin daily. Spiritually, we need to avoid the sickly, sweet junk food that the world promotes in movies, talk shows, the internet, and in print.
Isn't jw.org and indeed this very program accessible via the internet? Probably he means that movies, the internet and talk shows are okay so long as they have good things to say about the organisation.
Just as with the person who has diabetes, this requires a permanent lifestyle change from what we might have exposed ourselves to in the past. In addition to avoiding unwholesome junk food from Satan's system, we also need to take daily injections of God's Word and other wholesome provisions. This has become more and more important the deeper we get into these last days.
Okay, let's just talk about that analogy. Tony Morris is likening diabetes to inherited sin. So he coins the phrase spiritual diabetes. I'm not so sure that that is a bulletproof analogy because, not everybody suffers from diabetes. I mean, that's the obvious thing. Apparently 8.3% of the adult population suffer from diabetes. So who, in his analogy, are the 91.7% who don't have spiritual diabetes? The whole point of Morris's analogy, of course, is to try to convince witnesses that they have a problem that only Watchtower can fix. They are sick, they are sinful, they are in need of medicine that only Watchtower can provide. To coin a Christopher Hitchens phrase, they have been created sick and commanded to be well. The fascinating thing, at least for me, when I was first beginning to wake up from my indoctrination, is that the Bible doesn't really support inherited sin, at least not in the Old Testament. And let me just explain what I mean by that. When I was first waking up, before I set up JW Survey, Eric Bottorff let me write for him on JW Struggle, and you can still find one of my old articles if you Google an article titled "The Two Trees, My Genesis Ponderings." I wrote this when I was still sort of a skeptical Christian, and the gist of the article was that in the book of Genesis, if you just read the book of Genesis by itself, There is no notion of inherited sin. Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden not because they're sinful. It doesn't use the word sin in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. In fact, sin is used only in Genesis chapter 4 when God says to Cain, look, there is sin crouching at the door, just before Cain murders Abel. And then sin is used again when describing the world before the flood comes. But sin is not mentioned in the first 3 chapters of Genesis when apparently it is introduced into mankind, which is surely significant. Instead, what you have at the end of Genesis chapter 3 is God having this conversation with someone in which he says, Adam and Eve have become like us, knowing good and bad, because they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Now, we can't have a situation where they stay in the Garden of Eden and continue eating from the tree of life, because that will mean that not only are they like us, knowing good and bad, but they're also immortal. So to stop them from being immortal, let's banish them from the Garden of Eden. That's why Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, and that is, according to Genesis, why they grow old and die, because they no longer have access to the tree of life. This whole idea of inherited sin was only really introduced in the New Testament when Paul starts writing about the sin of Adam and Eve and how that's been passed down to mankind. In the Old Testament, there is no mention of inherited sin. In fact, there's just one scripture in Psalms. In Psalms 51 verse 5, David writes in one of his songs, "Look, I was born guilty of error, and my mother conceived me in sin." So if you want, you can extrapolate and say, oh, well, David was describing mankind in general, but more likely he was just talking about himself and how he feels he was born sinful. Doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's born sinful. Now, if all of this sounds confusing, the good news for people like myself who've walked away from religion completely is that it doesn't have to make sense, because it is all man-made. You know, the Bible is a man-made book, so it doesn't have to make sense. But the reason why I'm bringing all of this to your attention is because I believe this whole concept of inherited sin is custom made for cults like Watchtower to make people feel guilty, make people feel unworthy, and put people on this hamster wheel where they'll never quite be able to match up, because as hard as they try, they'll always be sinners and they will always be in need of, as I said before, the medicine that only Watchtower can give.
In the early 1900s, the focus was on preaching the good news. Little attention was given to building strong Christian marriages and families. For a time, marriage was even discouraged, well beyond the intent of the Scriptures. I did some checking, and commendably, between 1919 and 1921, there was a feature in the Golden Age magazine once or twice a month called the Juvenile Bible Study. In 1920, a brochure was released called the Golden Age ABC. Then it wasn't until 1941 that the now famous book entitled Children was handed out to all young ones at the convention that year.
Firstly, Toni Morris would be well advised to steer well clear of the Golden Age magazine. I mean, there was some crazy stuff in that magazine. I could probably write a book about all the bonkers material that was included from The Faithful Slave during the years that the Golden Age was in print. Just as one example, I mean, I wrote an article a few years ago now about racism in Watchtower literature. And there's a number of examples of racism in the Golden Age. And just as one example, they had an article once about Harriet Beecher Stowe and her book Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it was basically blasting Uncle Tom's Cabin, which obviously was a beacon of equality in its time. It was really denouncing the slave trade. And it basically demonized Harriet Beecher Stowe as being influenced by Satan because she wrote it. That's the sort of material that was in the Golden Age. So really the organization should be distancing itself completely from what it wrote there. Secondly, let's just go back to what Toni Morris said about the organization once dissuading marriage.
In the early 1900s, the focus was on preaching the good news. Little attention was given to building strong Christian marriages and families. For a time, marriage was even discouraged, well beyond the intent of the Scriptures.
Morris hints very strongly that around the time of the 1900s, Watchtower literature dissuaded marriage, which he acknowledges is well beyond the intent of the Scriptures. But then he gives the impression that sort of from 1919 onwards, when the Golden Age was released, things get better. Well, 1919 is obviously significant for Jehovah's Witnesses because they believe that it was between 1914 and 1919 that Jesus appointed the organisation to be his faithful slave. So it stands to reason that everything from 1919 onwards should make a degree of sense. But one of the early publications that Morris points to as an example of this enlightened new attitude regarding the family is this book, the 1941 Rutherford publication, Children. In fact, this is one of the last Rutherford writings before he died in 1942. On page 21 of the book, you can see this picture of two young people. Their names are John and Eunice. And basically, they're a fictional couple of young people who begin and end the book having a conversation basically about their lives and about their attitude towards the Bible and what they want out of life. And amazingly, at the end of the book, they decide that they don't want to get married until after the new system begins. In case you think I'm making this up, I'm going to read to you from page 366, where John announces the decision he's reached. It says, or he says, "Armageddon is surely near." This is in 1941. "And during that time, the Lord will clean off the earth everything that offends and is disagreeable. Then, by his grace, we shall begin our life with a greater vision and prolonged joy. Now we see by faith the great theocracy, and we are wholly and unreservedly committed to that righteous government. From now on, we shall have our heart devotion fixed on the theocracy, knowing that soon we shall journey forever together in the earth. Our hope is that within a few years our marriage may be consummated, and by the Lord's grace we shall have sweet children that will be an honour to the Lord. We can well defer our marriage until lasting peace comes to the earth. Now we must add nothing to our burdens, but be free and equipped to serve the Lord. When the theocracy is in full sway, it will not be burdensome to have a family." By all means, decide for yourselves, but I would argue that if Tony Morris is trying to convince us that after 1919 the organisation was no longer discouraging young ones from getting married, he's lying. This book was published a full 2 decades after Jesus supposedly chose the Watchtower organisation to be his faithful and discreet slave. And rather than encouraging families to form, it actually did the exact opposite. It encouraged young ones to not start families in the first place. You can't get a more anti-family message than that. Well, apart from shunning.
In the 1970s, the book, Making Your Family Life Happy, was released. About the same time, the books, Listening to the Great Teacher and Your Youth Getting the Best Out of It, were published.
And as a tribute to the brilliance and wisdom of these books, allow me to read from them. The 1978 Family Life Book, page 58, paragraph 11. There is much that can be learned about preparing food. It is beneficial to become informed on the basics of nutrition so that you can safeguard the health of your family. But simply setting nutritious food before your husband is not necessarily going to win his praise. The Bible tells us that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, knew how to prepare food in a tasty manner, in such a way that her husband was fond of it. Many wives could benefit from her example. The 1971 book, Listening to the Great Teacher, page 124. King Herod did not want to kill John because he knew that John was a good man. But Herod had made a promise, and he was afraid of what others at the party would think if he changed his mind. So he sent a man out to the prison to chop off the head of John. This is a children's book, remember. Soon the man came back. He had John's head on a plate, and he gave it to the girl. Then the girl ran and gave it to her mother. Wasn't that terrible? But what about the other birthday party that the Bible tells about? Was it better? This party was for a king of Egypt. At his party he had someone's head chopped off too, and then he hung him up for the birds to eat. Do you think that God approved of these parties? Would you have wanted to be at them? Now we know that everything that is in the Bible is there for a reason. It tells us about good people so that we can copy them, and it tells us about bad people so that we will not do what they did. The Bible tells about just 2 birthday parties, and both were bad. So, what would you say that God is telling us about birthday parties? Does God want us to celebrate birthdays? The 1976 youth book, page 36. Now, what do you think? Do you agree that because in today's world masturbation is a very common thing, this makes it a natural, normal function of the body? Lying and stealing are also common today. Yet you wouldn't say this makes them natural and proper, would you? The common cold is quite universal, but this certainly doesn't mean that you want it, does it? Then what about the claim that masturbation is harmless? From a physical standpoint, the majority of doctors say that occasional masturbation is harmless. Like most psychiatrists, they say that damage comes only if the practicer has feelings of guilt that cause mental and emotional disturbance, these in turn producing physical upset. But doctors and psychiatrists are imperfect humans, subject to error, and their views change. Watchtower's views change all the time. There is, though, a source of counsel that young people can turn to that is stable and free from error or misjudgment. That is God's word. What about the people outside the ark? Jesus says the flood came and swept them all away. Even if they climbed up a hill, that didn't help. The downpour didn't stop for 40 days and 40 nights. Soon the whole earth was covered with water, even the Himalayas. All the people outside the ark were now dead. Why? As Jesus said, they did not listen. But there, floating on the water, was the ark. Noah, his family, and the animals were safe inside. Jehovah saved the people who listened to him. Now, why should we know about what happened in Noah's day? Do you remember what Jesus said? He said that what happened then is a lesson for us. Jehovah will again destroy all bad people, but this time he will not use a flood. The time for him to do this is near. When God does this, who will be the people that God will keep alive? Will it be persons who are so busy with other things that they never wanted to learn about God? Will it be persons who were always too busy to study the Bible? Will it be those who never wanted to go to meetings where people learned God's will? What do you think? We want to be among those people whom God will keep alive, don't we? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our family could be like Noah's, so that God would save all of us? Let's always help one another to be faithful to God, so that he will save all of us. Page 39 of the youth book. Weakly giving in to sexual desires by masturbation will certainly not give you strength when faced with a situation tempting you to commit fornication or even homosexuality. Just the opposite. It cultivates wrong thinking and wrong desire. In fact, masturbation can lead into homosexuality. I'm not making this up, it really said that. In such instances, the person not satisfied with his lonely sexual activity seeks a partner for mutual sex play. This happens much more frequently than you may realize. Contrary to what many persons think, homosexuals are not born that way, but their homosexual behavior is learned. And often a person gets started when very young by playing with another's sexual parts and then engaging in homosexual acts. Page 132 of the family book. A spanking may be a lifesaver to a child, for God's word says, "Do not hold back discipline from the mere boy. In case you beat him with the rod, he will not die. With the rod you yourself should beat him, that you may deliver his very soul from Sheol, the grave itself." Again, foolishness is tied up with the heart of a boy. The rod of discipline is what will remove it far from him. If parents hold their children's life interests dear to them, they will not weakly or carelessly let disciplinary action slip from their hands. Love will motivate them to take action wisely and fairly when it is needed.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavoured to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental point of view.
I regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question. Sorry. Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
In 1982, Awake began a regular series that has run for decades entitled Young People Ask. We now have 2 up-to-date books with the same title, and the series of articles continues on the jw.org website.
And these are the latest Young People Ask books. Have you ever felt the way Vicky did? Many would urge you simply to embrace your sexuality and come out as bisexual. However, you should be aware that same-sex attraction is often nothing more than a passing phase. That's what Vicky found out. So did 16-year-old Lisette. She says, "Talking to my parents about my feelings made me feel better. Also, through my biology classes in school, I learned that during the adolescent years, hormone levels can fluctuate greatly. I truly think that if youths knew more about their bodies, they would understand that same-sex attraction can be temporary, and they wouldn't feel the pressure to be gay. Even if your feelings seem more deep-rooted than a short-lived growing pain, realize that the Bible presents you with a reachable goal. You can choose not to act on your wrong desires, no matter what they are. Similarly, at school, you're surrounded by people who lack the protection that comes from being one of Jehovah's friends. If you were to abandon Jehovah's standards just to be close to your classmates, you would only endanger your own spiritual health and happiness. How much better it would be if you tried to help your classmates join you in the lifeboat, so to speak, by showing them how to serve Jehovah. Really, in what better way could you prove to be a true friend? In other words, you don't just go to school to learn, you go to school to preach. What if same-sex desires persist? Do not give in to them. Jehovah condemns homosexual acts. Thus, the person who struggles with same-sex desires is presented with a reachable goal. He or she can choose not to act on those desires. To illustrate, a person might be disposed to rage. In the past, he may have freely given in to fits of anger. After studying the Bible, though, he becomes aware of the need to develop self-control. Does this mean that he'll never again feel anger welling up inside him? No. However, because he knows what the Bible says about uncontrolled anger, he will strive hard not to succumb to his feelings. It's similar with a person who is attracted to others of the same sex, but who has now come to learn what the Bible says about homosexual practices. On occasion, an improper desire may still present itself, but by viewing homosexuality the way Jehovah views it, a person can find the strength to resist that desire. So being gay is comparable to being angry. How can I protect myself from sexual predators? And the kind of, towards the end, it says telling your story. So you're thinking, oh great, it's encouraging victims of sexual predators to tell their story. Well, who is it telling them to tell their story to? It says, in fact, if you are a Christian, it is important that you speak to a congregation elder about what happened. The comforting words of a loving shepherd can assure you that as a victim of rape, you have not been defiled by someone else's sin. And then on the next page, 234, it says, talking about what happened and expressing your feelings can keep you from becoming consumed with anger and resentment. It may also help you to gain relief, perhaps for the first time in years. After she told her parents about the abuse, Natalie found that to be true. They supported me, she says. So far we've got the elders, we've got the parents. Natalie also found comfort in prayer. Talking to God helped me, she says. So, parents, elders, God. Final paragraph. You too can find that there is a time to heal. Rely on supportive friends. Parents, elders, God, supportive friends, okay? Who are like the elders described as being similar to a hiding place from the wind and a place of concealment from the rainstorm. Take care of yourself physically and emotionally. Get needed rest, and most of all, rely on the God of all comfort, Jehovah, who will soon bring about a new world in which evildoers themselves will be cut off, but those hoping in Jehovah are the ones that will possess the earth. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. In a chapter in the Young People Ask book, the latest series, under the heading, How Can I Protect Myself from Sexual Predators? It doesn't say want to go to the police.
We have the book Learn from the Great Teacher, and so many features and activities for young ones on the website that I would be out of time if I tried to enumerate them all.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's talking about the same website that features a join the dots image of one of Solomon's soldiers holding a baby with a knife in his hand as though he's going to kill it, and also the same website that has a comic book depiction of Lot's wife with a tear in her eye as her body turns to salt. Charming stuff for children. And what can we say about the Great Teacher book? Well, it has more of the same hideous nonsense that we saw in the 1971 Great Teacher book. In fact, a complete rehashing of the birthday stuff. It says on page 155, it is true that at such parties today, people do not chop off someone's head, but the whole idea of celebrating birthdays started with people who did not worship the true God. The Catholic Encyclopedia says about the birthday celebrations mentioned in the Bible, only sinners make great rejoicings over the day on which they were born. Do we want to be like them? There's some horrendous coercion on page 141 where you can see a family escaping a scene of destruction, which I assume is Armageddon. And it says, the Bible promises the world is passing away. This means that all of those who are not followers of the Great Teacher will be no more. They will not be allowed to live forever. Do you know who will live forever? The Bible goes on to say, he that does the will of God remains forever. Yes, only those who do good, who do the will of God, will live forever in God's new world. So even if it is hard, we want to do good, don't we? I'm guessing when it says we want to do good, what it really means is we want to do whatever the hell the governing body tells us to do. More coercion for witness kids to preach while they're at school on page 30. On page 146, there's a picture of some chaps playing football along with the caption, what idols do people give glory to today? I'm guessing that playing football or supporting football teams is a form of idolatry, But it's not so bad if you have a particular emblem that perhaps says jw.org and you make souvenirs with it and you have it on your lapel badge and you have it in your books. And of course it would be a crime to pay tribute to the great teacher book without showing you the beautiful image on page 243 depicting people running for their lives as fireballs rain down with death, destruction, murder of anyone who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. All perfectly appropriate stuff for kids.
And I will certainly never forget the privilege I had in 2012 to introduce the animated series Become Jehovah's Friend. That has proved to be a blessing for both young ones and their parents. What a teaching tool for both.
Ah yes, the Caleb and Sophia Become Jehovah's Friend cartoons, which so far since 2012 have been reminding kids that they will displease Jehovah if they play with the wrong kind of plastic toy.
Caleb, who likes magic? Jehovah or Satan?
Satan.
Right. Magic is bad. That's why Jehovah hates it. Do you really want to play with something that Jehovah hates?
Then there's the one where Jehovah's Witness children are threatened with death if they don't pay attention at the meetings.
He paid attention, and it saved his life. Paying attention at the meetings can help save your life.
At Genesis 6:22, we read,
There was the one where Jehovah's Witness children are told to give their ice cream money to Watchtower. And who could forget the most recent monstrosity in which Jehovah's Witness children are instructed to badger their classmates who may happen to be gay or lesbian or have gay or lesbian parents.
But I want everyone to get to paradise.
So does Jehovah. And you know what? People can change. That's why we share his message. So, what can you say to Carrie?
Well, I could tell her about the paradise. I could tell her about the animals and the resurrection.
That's awesome! Let's practice.
In 2014,
You were voted one of the year's craziest right-wing nutjobs by Advocate magazine, remember?
Our influence on fashion, such as designing tight pants, encourages immorality. To wrap things up on a perhaps lighter note, Anthony Morris III, a leader of the Jehovah's Witnesses, says immodest clothing is all the fault of gay fashion designers. In a November video, he denounced this skin-tight stuff that women wear when they exercise and the metrosexual look for men, he apparently just discovered that word, consisting of the tight suit jacket and the tight pants. He explained,
The homosexuals that are designing these clothes, they like you in tight pants. That's who likes it, not spiritual people.
In 2014, I attended the International Convention in Atlanta, Georgia, here in the United States. After a little 2-year-old girl saw my face on the big jumbo screen giving a talk, she eagerly started searching all around her for someone. When her parents asked her who she was looking for, she said, Caleb. He must be here because I saw his grandfather giving a talk.
It's a funny old life being an instantly recognized cult leader, isn't it?
Many children ask to meet Caleb in person when they visit Bethel. 2 postings of an item every month is making quite an impression on little hearts. With Bible principles being impressed on the minds and hearts of children so early, we prayerfully anticipate many spiritually minded teenagers in the years to come.
Shameless child indoctrination. There really is no shame in this man. He doesn't see anything wrong with the fact that he is deliberately setting out to produce this army of drones who will be obedient to the governing body. But frankly, if you're in his shoes, who can blame him? Because, let's face it, the preaching work is basically bringing in no one. I mean, look at people who are out on the literature cart. Everyone's walking past. I saw a few of them in London. Nobody is interested. And I can remember what it was like going on the ministry as a witness. Very, very rarely do you get into any conversations with people. Very, very rarely. Well, in fact, almost never do you manage to convince someone to come to the meeting with you. So, of course, the only option is to indoctrinate kids from birth. Where else are the new Jehovah's Witnesses going to come from?
Yes, we, his spiritual family in heaven, and all humans on earth who dedicate their lives to him, give glory to Jehovah.
I can't decide whether Tony Morris has just hideously misread his script or whether the script itself is at fault, because he just says, yes, we, his spiritual family in heaven, and all those who dedicate themselves to him on earth. Last I checked, Tony Morris isn't in heaven, he's on earth, regardless of whether he aspires to be in heaven someday. So I can't quite make sense of what he's just said.
Indeed, we thank Jehovah for all the spiritual provisions he's made through his word and organization to protect every family who takes up his name.
Watchtower is God's organization, and Jehovah's Witnesses don't have to prove it to you either.
May Jehovah bless all of you families as you strive to win the war that Satan wages against you in these last days.
Again, if there's a war being waged against the family units that affects me personally, it's a war in which the chief weapon is shunning and the chief aggressor is Watchtower. It's supremely hypocritical of Watchtower to pat itself on the back as being a family-friendly organisation, when in actual fact it's decimating and ripping apart families through its cruel shunning practice purely because people like me choose to stop believing its propaganda.
In this dramatization, pay attention to how the family head is aware of the needs of the family and how he plans accordingly.
Hi, my name is Joe. A few weeks ago, we all sat together for supper. I was so tired, and my wife Jenny felt the same way. She always does it all, taking care of the children so well, but it was not easy for her in recent weeks.
The wife does it all.
Sarah felt that we are too restrictive on how she dresses. She just does not understand. It was hard to convince her, and to motivate her to share in the field service is becoming a challenge. It was not always like this. She used to enjoy going out in field service.
Sarah is clearly no longer a child. She's growing into an adult for whom acts of token allegiance to a cult do not come naturally.
And Tom, he is such a good boy. But all of a sudden, he was raving about the games his classmates have on their phones. It's always about having supernatural powers, and it fascinated him, even though he is small. But when I asked him to take out the garbage, suddenly his superpowers left him.
Oh, the horror. A young boy who's into superheroes.
And Mike, our smallest, it was hard to get him to go to bed or clean up his room. I realized there are a few things we need to speak about.
I know this is only a dramatization, but how sad that here we have a chap with a perfectly normal family, and yet apparently everything is a problem that he needs to fix. And of course, this is only being projected out onto real Jehovah's Witness families who were being told basically that all of these things that have been listed, a young teenage girl who doesn't want to go on the ministry because it's embarrassing, a young kid who likes superheroes, a kid who has a messy room, all of these things are terrible issues that need to be resolved and discussed.
We prayed together. Then we had an idea.
Parents can't have ideas unless they pray together.
The following day, we asked our children if we can consider Noah as the theme for our next family worship. All of us liked the idea. Each one of us should prepare something. Mike, Tom, and I wanted to build the ark.
Yes, building a model ark by using cardboard to represent timber and bitumen, which apparently kept a 500-foot vessel afloat. There's just one problem with this, as Bill Nye explains in his debate with creationist Ken Ham.
Somehow, Noah and his family were able to build a wooden ship that would house 14,000 individuals. There are 7,000 kinds, and there's a boy and a girl for each one of those. So it's about 14,008 people. And these people were unskilled. As far as anybody knows, they had never built a wooden ship before. Furthermore, they had to get all these animals on there, and they had to feed them, and I understand that Mr. Ham has some explanations for that, which I frankly find extraordinary, but this is the premise of the bit. And we can then run a test, a scientific test. People in the early 1900s built an extraordinarily large wooden ship, the Wyoming. It was a 6-masted schooner, the largest one ever built. It had a motor on it for winching cables and stuff. But this boat had a great difficulty. It was not as big as the Titanic, but it was a very long ship. It would twist in the sea. It would twist this way, and this way. And in all that twisting, it leaked. It leaked like crazy. The crew could not keep the ship dry. And indeed, it eventually foundered and sank, loss of all 14 hands. So there were 14 crewmen aboard a ship built by very, very skilled shipwrights in New England. These guys were the best in the world at wooden shipbuilding. And they couldn't build a boat as big as the ark is claimed to have been. Is that reasonable? Is that possible? That the best shipbuilders in the world couldn't do what 8 unskilled people, men and their wives, were able to do?
And of course, we need the animals.
Ah yes, the animals. I'll come to that a little bit later.
While preparing, I got the chance to speak with Sarah about her dress in a more relaxed setting. She understood that, like Noah, when it comes to Jehovah's commands, we need to do just so.
Yes, Sarah, please try to remember, if you don't wear the correct kind of dress, you will be slaughtered just like all those who didn't make it into the ark. Apart from that, how was school today?
We talked about how it was before the flood, and what kind of world Noah and his family lived in.
As discussed in a previous rebuttal video, it was apparently a world in which the Egyptian civilization was already up and running, as evidenced by clothing that has been found that actually predates the year the flood was supposed to have happened.
Noah's family needed real courage to preach.
They also apparently needed fake drawn-on beards because, as we all know, real beards are upsetting to Jehovah.
They had to explain about the rain and how the ark would be needed to survive the flood. Something that had never happened before.
Yes, the rain. Apparently enough rain to cover the highest mountain. There is, of course, just one small problem with this story, and that's the fact that there literally are not enough water molecules on the planet to inundate the land surface. One way we used to get around this problem as witnesses was to say, yes, but you don't understand. All of that water that inundated the planet is now locked up in the polar ice caps and the glaciers. If those were to melt, the whole Earth would be inundated again. Unfortunately, though, that's not actually true. If you research this, and I would encourage you to if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, what you find is that if all of the water that's locked up in the polar ice caps, the Arctic and the Antarctic, and all of the glaciers were to suddenly melt, so all frozen water was to melt, the ocean level would rise by something like 60 to 70 meters, which would be catastrophic. We would lose pretty much all of our coastal cities, or most of our coastal cities. But it would not cover the land surface. And here is a map taken from the National Geographic magazine to show you what North America would look like if the ocean levels were to rise by 60 to 70 metres. And as you can quite plainly see, though it would be catastrophic, the good majority of the landmass would still be there. There simply is not enough water on the planet to cover the landmass of the continent.
All the people thought they were crazy.
Well, you do have felt tip beards and rope around your head.
And while we were talking about this, it came out that Sarah felt embarrassed when she met a schoolmate in the field service recently.
Cheer up, Sarah. At least your schoolmate can't see you now.
For Tom, I found a great picture.
Dad told us that the world at this time was very bad. People were fighting and many were afraid. And that is why Jehovah brought the flood.
Just how bad were these people? Were they evil enough to, slaughter almost every man, woman and child on the planet just to prove a point?
It made me think about the games from my schoolmates. I like to play those games, but I know that Jehovah does not like that. So, why do I?
You heard it here first, folks. If you play violent video games, you're no better than the baddies who were drowned in Noah's flood, which, by the way, never happened. Once again, rule number 1 in JW parenting is the use of fear and death threats.
Then I read Genesis 6:19, and bring into the ark 2 of every sort of living creature.
Dad showed us how the animals went into the ark. Each one had its own place, and they went inside 2 at a time without any chaos.
This brings us to the animals. Now, at the latest count, there are 6.5 million land-dwelling species on the earth. And don't forget you have to double that number if you allow for 2 of each kind going into the ark. So that's 13 million animals fitting into 1.5 million cubic feet of space. Of course, some creationists drastically scale down that number because they argue that it wasn't species that were loaded into the ark, but kinds. But to believe that 6.5 million species originated from only a few thousand kinds over a space of only 4,000 years, you have to believe in a rate of evolution that far exceeds anything that scientists teach. Then there's a small problem of how the kangaroos got back to Australia, as Bill Nye explains.
One of the extraordinary claims associated with Mr. Ham's worldview is that this giant boat, very large wooden ship, went aground safely on a mountain in the Middle East, what we now call the Middle East. And so places like Australia are populated then by animals who somehow managed to get from the Middle East all the way to Australia in the last 4,000 years. Now that to me is an extraordinary claim. We would expect then, somewhere between the Middle East and Australia, we would expect to find evidence of kangaroos. We would expect to find some fossils, some bones. In the last 4,000 years, somebody would have been hopping along there and died along the way, and we'd find them. And furthermore, there's a claim that there was a land bridge that allowed these animals to get from Asia all the way to the continent of Australia, and that land bridge has disappeared in the last 4,000 years. No navigator, no diver, no U.S. Navy submarine, no one's ever detected any evidence of this, let alone any fossils of kangaroos. So your expectation is not met.
We wanted to keep in mind Genesis 6:22, and Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. He did just so.
And then the rain came, but we survived. That was great.
Which is more than can be said for the poor sods drowning outside.
We must take care of our family as Noah did, also by having a regular family worship like this.
What he calls regular family worship, I think I would call regular child indoctrination and fear-mongering.
We've now invited Brother and Sister Ortiz from New Britain, Connecticut, to visit our studio. Brother Ortiz serves as an elder and as a regular pioneer. He's had many additional privileges of service over the years, and Lynette has been regular pioneering for over 6 years. However, the reason we wanted to talk with them is that thus far, they have successfully countered Satan's attacks on their family. We'd like to hear how they accomplished this. Freddie, maybe you can tell us about your children and what they're doing with their lives now.
We have 2 sons. Gabriel, he's the oldest one. He started regular pioneer when he was 14 years old. At 18, he was appointed as ministerial servant. At 22 years old, he's been working at the plumbing department at the Warwick Construction for more than 2 years. Adrian is now 18 years old, and he also started regular pioneer when he was 14. Currently, he handles the accounts for the congregation and other privileges as well.
Well, they both have had an early start in their theocratic careers. That's commendable. I'm sure you're both proud of them. And we're confident that Jehovah, the one to whom every family owes its name, is pleased that they're giving an answer to his taunter.
Yes, you heard correctly. Both sons began regular pioneering at age 14. Because, as we all know, pushing cult propaganda is way more important than, getting a decent education.
Family worship is very important for us. I know it's easy to put off, but the benefits are hard to beat. Before this arrangement started, as a family, we value the Bible study with the family. I learned that a fetus is 6 months, he can recognize family's voice. So I started Bible study with my son when they were still in the womb.
Nice.
And continued to do so after that.
In case you're a JW parent and you missed that, apparently you're now supposed to start indoctrinating your children when they're still in the womb. But hey, at least Jehovah's Witnesses don't do child baptism, because that would just be weird.
One unexpected challenge that has changed our family dynamics over the years now was when Freddie was diagnosed with cancer in 2012. The treatment was aggressive and took its toll on his health.
And clearly ultimately saved your husband's life. But please don't bother thanking the doctors or anything. After all, they're just worldly people who selfishly sought higher education in pursuit of fame and wealth.
Our whole lifestyle changed. We had to move out from our house to an apartment. We gave away our dog's bike, and we have to watch our expenses really closely to keep going. This could have put a lot of strain in our family and our marriage and in spirituality. But again, by praying to Jehovah constantly and applying Bible principles, I can say my marriage and my family has never been better.
Only by being a loyal Jehovah's Witness can you have a happy family.
Now, very nice observation. Now, Gabriel, I'm interested in understanding what prompted you to regular pioneer when you were only 14 years old.
Oh, that's an easy one. He was indoctrinated from when he was a fetus into being in a cult that stigmatizes higher education.
It was at a point where my dad lost his job. Rather than stressing about it, worrying about it, he looked at things with a spiritual perspective. So he started to pioneer. And since our schedules matched perfectly, I was his little pioneer buddy. I would go out on service with him whenever he needed it. And I feel like if spiritual families, focus on spiritual matters, it helps them to come closer. And I can't imagine how our relationship and respect for one another can be any better than what it is now.
Very nice.
Well, that told me apparently he pioneered with his parents from when he was 14 because their schedules matched. Got it.
Now, Adrian, you began pioneering when you were 14 as well. How do you think that affected you as a person?
Well, first of all, the reason why I started pioneering was because I was going out in service with the rest of my family. And since they were already pioneering, I was getting the time in.
But I do think that taking on the responsibility of getting at least 70 hours a month in the service does make you think differently at 14 than it would have otherwise. I think it has helped me mature spiritually, and it has contributed to me being used at my full potential in the congregation. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Well, maybe going to Bethel.
Adrian, if you do end up going to Bethel, it might be worth double-checking your wardrobe while you're packing your bags. Tony tends to be quite sensitive in that area.
Tell us, what was it like when you learned that your dad had a serious health problem and would not be able to provide for the family like he used to?
It was probably one of the biggest challenges I've ever faced. When my dad got diagnosed with cancer, it was about the same time that I got my call to Bethel. And I was torn, I was divided. I felt like if I was to go to Bethel now, it would be selfish of me to leave my family at a time like that.
Hopefully he was also worried about the prospect of never seeing his father again. But for now, let's focus on the dilemma of whether or not he should go to Bethel.
But my family always had a spiritual view on things, and citing scriptures like Matthew 6:33 constantly helped me to see if as a whole, as a family, we put kingdom interests first, that Jehovah was going to provide because he's a loving father and friend. And then my dad lost his job, and again, all these feelings came up. But my family was adamant. They let me know that the congregation had been taking care of them for months now, and them doing some simplifying on their own helped them as well, and I didn't have to worry about anything. I do know that there's a scripture that says that we got to take care of our own, so I do anything I can to help my family back home. The only thing I hope is that I can have a good faith like they've shown through these difficult times.
Well, thank all of you for joining us. I think all of us are feeling that emotion and feel very close to you for sharing that.
Yes, in summary, the thing to remember is if a father's life is in the balance, the main consideration should be how best to serve Watchtower. Oh, and don't forget to indoctrinate your kids from when they're fetuses. That way they'll want to start pioneering from when they're 14. If their schedules permit, of course.
As a father, I can appreciate all that Freddie's trying to do as head of the family. And Lynette, your support beyond normal is very much to be commended. And we can tell your family is thriving spiritually, and we pray Jehovah will continue to bless your efforts, come what may. And we thank you, Gabriel and Adrian, for your surprise to the studio. Thank you very much for taking the time to be interviewed.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you.
Tony's so heartfelt in commending this family that he even looks up once or twice from his cue cards. What a surprise!
We witness to people we meet on the way.
Why do sincere people trust the Holy Scriptures? Please have a look at what it says here. All Scripture is inspired of God.
Only sincere people trust the Bible without question. And the Bible is divinely inspired because it says it's divinely inspired. Sounds legit.
This simple life is like an adventure.
As we have quite a big group, there are 12 of us, we have also organized our spiritual routine. We consider the daily text together and take part in discussing our publications using the questions.
We have a friendly, relaxed atmosphere. Everybody enjoys it.
Whoa, a camping holiday where you do the day's text each morning. Sign me up.
We also think about what clothes to wear. Experience has shown that our clothes can help us to win over these people. So we try to dress simply. We don't wear ties.
FYI, this same logic is not applied in most other countries.
The trips have helped our son make spiritual progress. For us as his parents, that is the greatest blessing. For example, after one of these trips, he became an unbaptized publisher.
A JW boy takes a step towards baptism after a childhood consisting of preaching holidays. Well, there's a shocker.
We usually start witnessing about 12 noon, and we finish around 5 p.m. Then the relaxation part of our day begins.
We have a campfire, some games, some music, and fun.
Early in the day, we used our energy in the ministry, and afterwards, we were able to relax and enjoy each other's company.
So we combine both our ministry and relaxation.
Just in case there's any confusion here, you can have camping holidays with dancing and music around the fire without door-to-door evangelizing for a cult for the whole afternoon.
In this dramatization, a family followed scriptural counsel when they faced the challenge of having to relocate to another city.
For 23 years, we've called this place home. We've raised a family here. 2 beautiful girls. 6 months ago, my boss called me into his office. The company was restructuring. They valued my work, but if I wanted to keep my job, I would need to move. It was a difficult decision. My job allowed me to support my family well, and it had never interfered with our spiritual routine.
This month's dramatization follows a family moving house. Next month, we'll follow a family who decides to go to the shops. And don't miss the episode where we show a family who decides to get a dog called Spike.
A brother in our hall had moved into the congregation a few years ago. I asked him how his family coped with the challenge.
Yes, moving from one house to another house in the same country is a challenge that must be coped with. I suppose taking your family across Europe to escape a war with hardly any money is just another kind of challenge.
He said that the key to staying grounded is maintaining the one thing that should never change, our spiritual routine. But that requires work and planning to make sure our move doesn't stop us from getting to the meetings, sharing in the ministry, spending time with our brothers and sisters, and looking after our family. His advice was spot on.
Staying grounded in your religious indoctrination is a complicated thing, requiring much discussion, contemplation, and careful planning. Must stay indoctrinated when I move house. Must stay indoctrinated when I move house. Darling, could you hand me my plan for staying spiritually grounded, please? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jessica. Hi, I'm Samantha. Nice to meet you.
The best way to get to know our new congregation is to work with the brothers and sisters in the ministry. No matter where we go, we'll find people that love Jehovah and each other.
Just another FYI, you can get to know people without walking around streets ringing doorbells of houses that are mostly empty because their owners are out working.
It took effort, but visiting the congregation ahead of time was well worth it. Look, we already have friends here. Unpacking seemed to never end.
Yes, conditional love may be fickle and melt away the moment you start thinking for yourself, but at least it provides cheap labour for when you move house.
Has anyone seen my ties?
I'll look.
Found them!
The ministry is very different. We've had to adapt and learn new techniques.
Such as standing next to a wheelie cart while many people walk past, which is actually more challenging than it sounds. Sometimes the boredom is so intense that you'd give anything for something to happen. Maybe a stray dog passing by.
Maybe tomorrow I'll want to settle down. Until tomorrow I'll just keep moving on.
Perhaps you are in your teens and you're starting to notice those of the opposite sex. Such emotions are natural and are part of growing up. But if you're not old enough to get married, what do you need to keep in mind?
That lying ahead of you in what should be the happiest, most carefree years of your life is endless frustration, guilt, and stress caused by sexual repression.
My name is Lily, and I sort of have this problem. There's a boy named Sean that recently moved to our school. I know I'm not supposed to like anyone who's not a witness. The trouble was, he is a witness. Sean and his family moved into our congregation. And the more I saw of him, the more I liked him.
My strength is exhausted because of my sign. If only I knew where to find God, I would go to his place of dwelling, help present my...
Of course, normally when a young person meets someone they fancy, it's a time of excitement, fun, thrills and exhilaration. But if you're a JW youth who meets someone you fancy, get ready for anxiety, stress and tension, not to mention adults looking at you with suspicion.
Every day I see couples my age at school. To me, they look happy.
Probably because they are happy.
Honestly, I wanted that happiness too.
Unfortunately, you've been born into a cult that finds reasons to frown on almost everything that makes people happy. Hell, even football can be a path to satanic influence. If Watchtower can write awake articles dissuading people from playing chess, they're sure as hell going to have a problem with young people exploring their sexuality.
At first, I didn't want to tell her, but she made me feel really comfortable. So I told her my feelings for Sean, expecting her to think bad of me, but she didn't.
Everything you're feeling is natural, Lily. I remember having the same feelings when I was your age too.
Really?
It's true. That's just how Jehovah created us, honey.
Yes, falling in love is only natural, and sexual attraction is just one of the many things Jehovah created. Apart from sexual attraction between two people of the same sex, that's not natural. Jehovah didn't create that.
And because He created us, He knows the best way for us to be happy. And that's all He wants for us. And that's all Daddy and I want for you too.
Jehovah just wants people to be happy. And all people who can be happy without Jehovah will be murdered by him.
Lily, thank you for telling us how you feel. Let me ask you something. Why do you think Jehovah created us with these natural feelings toward the opposite sex?
So that one day a man and woman can marry.
That's right. In fact, a good marriage is like two skaters on the ice. A beautiful performance can seem effortless, but is it really?
No.
No one would even attempt that without practice, a capable partner, or the right kind of guidance, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure his idea of practice isn't the same as everyone else's.
Well, it's the same with a good marriage, sweetie. It doesn't just happen. It too depends on a good partner, coordinated effort, but most importantly, wise counsel from Jehovah.
Because you can't have a happy marriage unless you're a Jehovah's Witness.
Lily, Jehovah loves us very much. And if we listen to him, we'll make good decisions in our life with absolutely no regrets.
Provided you never figure out that you've wasted the best years of your life in a cult. Trust me, if that ever happens, you will have a whole world of regret. Seriously, it's like the worst hangover ever.
By holding off dating a little longer, I wasn't missing out.
No, whatever you're doing now looks like way much more fun.
Rather, I was preparing myself. I could use the time now to focus on something much more important. My relationship with Jehovah.
There you have it. Cult indoctrination is more important than finding love and happiness. Got it.
Brother Eric Frost was a young man in Germany who set a good example in making wise decisions early in life. He was born in 1900, baptized 23 years later, and entered the full-time ministry in 1928. Not long after, he was put in charge of the underground work of the persecuted witnesses of Jehovah in Germany, caring well for that assignment for 8 months until he was incarcerated. In this archived audio recording, you will hear the fascinating experience of how Brother Frost composed a kingdom melody in the middle of Sachsenhausen, a Nazi concentration camp.
I actually couldn't believe when I heard the name Eric Frost pop up in this month's broadcasting episode. Why? Because not so long ago I ordered this book off Amazon, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Third Reich by Jim Penton. I would thoroughly recommend it to everyone. In my view, if you're serious about collecting books to do with Jehovah's Witness history, this is one of the crucial books to have in your collection because it details the true history of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the 30s and 40s, the period surrounding the Third Reich and the Second World War. And it sets right a lot of the stories that Watchtower tells about Jehovah's Witnesses during that period. And it actually has a lot to say about Eric Frost. If you turn to page 13, I'll just read you a brief paragraph that touches on Eric Frost. It says, "Ever since 1939, the Watchtower Society has done its best to keep the real nature of the Declaration of Facts and the Hitler letter hidden from loyal Jehovah's Witnesses and the general public. At the same time, it has poured verbal vitriol over the churches for having compromised with the Nazis. But seemingly embarrassing facts began to come out about one of the Watchtower's principal German leaders, Eric Frost, as early as 1961. In that year, the Watchtower published an autobiographical statement by Frost, the Society's former post-war German branch overseer, in which he recounted his persecution by the Nazis. This article was titled, "Deliverance from Totalitarian Inquisition Through Faith in God." Not surprisingly, in it, Frost portrayed himself as totally faithful to both his religious principles and his brethren. In his own words, he was like Daniel in the lion's den. Shortly thereafter, however, the German news magazine Der Spiegel claimed that after his arrest in March 1937, he had betrayed a number of his witness subordinates and their secret meeting places to the Gestapo. The Watchtower Society has chosen to ignore the allegations found in Der Spiegel and continues to revere Frost as a Jehovah's Witness hero. Now, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you're probably thinking, oh, well, this is just apostate propaganda. They're making all this up. Eric Frost was doubtless a true hero, and now they're trying to say that he compromised his loyalty. Well, actually, in the same book, what I find fascinating, in fact, about this book is if you go to the annex, what it gives you is a full copy or full copies of the original Gestapo interrogation reports. So there's another page, quite a lengthy document, because it seems he was quite thoroughly interrogated and gave a lot of information, not just about meeting places, but about the people who were involved in working for Watchtower with him. And following the original document, you have a translation, an English translation, so that you can see exactly what information Eric Frost divulged to the Gestapo under interrogation. Now, it's worth pointing out at this stage that there is no shame in divulging information after being interrogated by the Gestapo. That is quite understandable. Nobody is blaming Eric Frost for that, and in fact that's a point that Jim Penton goes to great lengths to make in his book. The point is, however, that Eric Frost is a figure that is put forward by Watchtower to highlight this myth that no Jehovah's Witnesses breached their loyalty when they were under interrogation, which simply isn't true, and there are official Nazi documents that prove that that is not the case.
As everybody knows, we had the hardest work and suffered the hardest in the concentration camps. We were starved. The labor exceeded our strength, and the harassment was often unbearable.
Here, Eric Frost tells us that Jehovah's Witnesses had the hardest work and suffered the hardest during the Holocaust in the concentration camps. And that seems to be quite an extraordinary claim. No one is trying to demean the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses did in fact suffer and die during the Holocaust. But it seems like quite an extraordinary claim to suggest that the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses was greater than any other group of Holocaust victims. Penton actually addresses this claim on page 225 of his book. He says, abundant evidence shows that the Nazis did not want to exterminate Jehovah's Witnesses. Rather, they wanted to break their opposition to the values of the Third Reich and turn them into loyal German citizens. Since most witnesses were ordinary Germans, they were not slated for death in the way that the Jews were. Severe as their plight was, and that plight should not be understated, it was not as bad as that of the Jews and cannot rightly be compared to the Holocaust of the Jews. Regarding this matter, even a fellow Jehovah's Witness, Jolene Chu, disagrees with Slapina. Slapina is a writer who tried to exaggerate the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses compared to other groups. Capitulation, not annihilation, seems to have been the Nazi goal for the witnesses. Despite the fact that Hitler declared about them in 1934, this brood will be exterminated. The Gestapo and SS applied the usual torture methods, and in the process, hundreds of witnesses died. But a clue as to the Nazi aim of breaking the witness resolve is found in a remarkable document offered repeatedly to witness prisoners, a renunciation of their faith, and a pledge of loyalty to the fatherland. The point is, you simply cannot say that the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses, as bad as it was during the Third Reich, was worse than that of the Jews if Jehovah's Witnesses had an opportunity to get out of that suffering simply by signing a document. The Jews, on the other hand, were literally intended for extermination. That's what the Nazis wanted. They clearly did not feel the same way about Jehovah's Witnesses.
In the mornings, when the 40 of us were marching through the streets of Oranienburg, we already felt worn out. When one started humming that melody, the entire labor group trembled with excitement. We had to control ourselves to not break out loud singing. That would have been dangerous, of course. They would have brought us back to the camp and severely punished us.
Hopefully it goes without saying that music can be uplifting, whether it is of the religious kind or not. But that said, when I was watching this experience, and I don't mean to in any way demean what these guys went through, I feel in a way a great sense of kinship with their suffering, because if I'd have been born as a Jehovah's Witness in 1930s Germany, I would likely have found myself in the same situation. The courage that they showed was quite remarkable, even though they should never have been put in that situation in the first place. It's still incredible the resolve they had. But when watching this experience, I just cannot help but see the irony. And I'm going to show you now the rest of the experience, because it shows some parts of the song that Eric Frost wrote. And the lyrics, which he's actually writing about his Nazi oppressors, actually have a great deal of resonance with those like myself who are being punished simply for the crime of leaving the cult that they grew up in.
Sie möchten uns gerne regieren. Sie möchten uns gerne regieren.
If there's one thing that totalitarian regimes want to do, love to do, have to do, it's control people. Hitler's Nazi Germany was obsessed with gaining the loyalty and allegiance of an entire nation of people, and the same is true with cults. Cults have to control you. That's why we have a convention program this very year which deals with loyalty. We want your loyalty. We want to be able to control you. We want to be able to rule you. So again, the irony is that in this song that is being written about a Nazi dictatorship and, cruel oppression within a concentration camp, he's inadvertently writing about what his own organisation will grow into. Because don't forget, in the 1940s, the option was available to you if you woke up from your indoctrination. You could get out without automatic shunning. It wasn't until 1981 that the rules changed, so that there was no graceful way to leave Jehovah's Witnesses. In that year, it became so that disfellowshipping and disassociation were one and the same thing. The door slammed shut, and it was impossible to leave without being shunned if you simply wanted to walk away from your former religion.
Zeugen Jehovas im Feindesland und fern von der Heimat, vom Liebsten verbannt, hebt auf eure Blicke zu dem des Hand. Für euch ist schon ausgestreckt.
I hope you, like me, noticed that lyric, cut off from those we love. Isn't shunning such a horrendous teaching that affects not just those like me who are being shunned because we've decided to leave the organisation, it also affects those who are having to do the shunning. And again, only this year, for the convention season with the theme of loyalty, it's quite evident from the titles of the talks on the programme that witnesses are being reminded to go against their own natural affection and shun any family members who are no longer witnesses. So such a cruel expectation and command to place on witnesses. And again, how ironic that this is being described in the lyrics to a song that's written by a man who is loyal to Watchtower and describing his captivity under a totalitarian regime.
In this music video, pay close attention to the blessings that resulted from this couple's heartfelt desire to serve in the foreign language field.
And I actually really like this new music video for reasons I will explain.
You may be contemplating, should I make the move? Prayerfully meditating, Jehovah, what should I do? So let's just take a moment and try to help you decide. 'Cause if you step on over, you'll be so happy you tried. You gotta step on over and leave your worries behind. 'Cause when you step on over, you will be blessed if you try. Oh, step on over. Step on over that Macedonia line.
Okay, first of all, it's catchy music. We can all agree on that. In fact, Deanna was just listening to it now and she said, that's the sort of music you would expect to hear in a bar. It just throws you off when you hear the lyric Jehovah. So great music, thumbs up for that. But why I especially like this music video is because it encourages witnesses to move into the foreign language field. And I actually think that is a good thing. And I'll explain why. Because, something similar happened to me. When I moved to Croatia, I was effectively moving into what to me was a foreign language field. I was changing completely my environment so that I no longer understood 100% of what was being instructed or what was being taught from the platform. I was basically having the plug pulled out on my indoctrination. And I can only see benefits to that, because once Jehovah's Witnesses have an opportunity to just be free of that constant barrage of propaganda, it gives them more opportunity to start thinking for themselves. I obviously understand it won't work that way with everyone, but that's how it worked with me. There's also another story of something similar happening. If you type into Google Amber Scorer, China, those keywords should take you to the story of Amber Scorer, who is now an ex-JW, but she wrote a beautiful story for a magazine. I think it's the Believer magazine, detailing how she was able to wake up from her indoctrination as a Jehovah's Witness by learning Chinese and moving to China. So she moved to China to serve where the need is great in a country that's under ban. And ironically, by moving to this more restricted, politically restricted environment, she was able to start thinking for herself. Because when she was speaking to ordinary Chinese people in their language and trying to explain her quite outrageous beliefs in simple terms that they could understand, it suddenly hit her how outrageous her beliefs were. So I would encourage everybody to check out her story. We covered it on jwsurvey.org, but her actual story that she wrote for the Believer magazine is the real deal. It's the full, all of the details are there. But I would especially recommend Jehovah's Witnesses to move to another country or to move into the foreign language field, because it just might give you the opportunity, a little bit of breathing space to start thinking for yourself.
But we have more in store for you. We're also pleased to announce the release of a new brochure entitled Answers to 10 Questions Young People Ask.
Oh, goody, more child indoctrination propaganda.
The content of this 32-page full-color brochure is based on articles in Awake and the 2 volumes of Questions Young People Ask, Answers That Work, as well as the Young People Ask articles on the jw.org website.
I had a brief look through this new brochure, and here are a few of my highlights. On page 13, we have a section titled 3 Reasons to Admit to Your Mistakes, which is more than a bit hypocritical given the fact that Watchtower never admits to any of its mistakes. The writers of this brochure also apparently had no conscience pangs when putting together the box on page 16, which lists social isolation as a form of bullying. Shunning anyone? On page 22, the writers preach sexual abstinence with the use of fear, paranoia, and a dash of misinformation. Young people are told that premarital sex will lead to distress, distrust, and disillusionment. Without citing any sources, the writers claim many boys find that they are less attracted to a girl who has given in to their advances. The same page has a box titled For Girls Only that begins by saying a number of boys have said that they would never marry a girl that they have had sex with. Why? Because they prefer someone who is chaste. Again, no sources cited. The writing department has apparently now resorted to pulling their facts from thin air, or perhaps somewhere else I can think of. The brochure also has a section dealing with sexual assault that appears to be only a slight revision of the material shown earlier in this video from volume 1 of the Young People Ask books. Like its predecessor, nowhere does it tell abuse victims to go to the police. Instead, they're told to pray, talk with trusted confidants, including parents and elders, and rely on the God of all comfort, Jehovah. Bear in mind, this is a brand new brochure released after the Royal Commission in Australia. Finally, section 9 is devoted to denying evolution, as you would expect, it sets about this task by completely misrepresenting what evolution actually is. The opening blurb is very revealing when it says, "If evolution is true, life has no lasting purpose. If creation is true, we can find satisfying answers to questions about life and the future." This, I feel, is the creationist mantra in one neat package. Whether something is true or not in their eyes depends on what it can offer, preferably the hope of cheating death. A "what would you do" scenario is presented in which a boy called Alex is correctly taught that evolution is a fact, but he doesn't want to appear foolish by questioning his teacher. Stop and think, say the writers. People on both sides of the debate are often quick to state what they believe without really knowing why they believe it. How ironic, given that most witnesses would struggle to explain 607 BCE, 1919, or the faithful and discreet slave teaching. Some people believe in creation simply because that's what they've been taught at church. Damn straight. It then adds, some people believe in evolution simply because that's what they've been taught at school. A false comparison is thus presented in which schools and churches somehow have equal credibility when it comes to teaching scientific facts. Claiming that life did not have a creator is as absurd as claiming that this house did not have a builder, we are then told at the top of page 28. This overlooks the fact that things can be built without humans being the builders. For example, mountains are imposing, and to some may appear to have been formed by God, as the Bible indicates at Amos 4:13. But thanks to the theory of plate tectonics, we now know that mountains, like all geological anomalies, are formed naturally, and that the Earth's crust is in a constant state of flux. In short, you don't need humans to make things. What you need is a scientifically explainable process, which evolution is. Then on page 28 we are given 6 questions to consider. In the first 4 questions, evolution is dismissed as false because the universe could not have resulted from a random Big Bang, because humans are more intelligent than apes, and because life is complex. Firstly, the Big Bang neither proves nor disproves evolution, and any uncertainty over what caused the Big Bang bears no relation to the fact that the evolution of life on Earth is observed and proven. Secondly, though humans are more intelligent than apes, apes are certainly more intelligent than most other animals, which is what you would expect if humans evolved from the same lineage. For example, apes have been observed using tools, beating humans in memory tests, and even mastering sign language. Thirdly, as explained in a previous JW Broadcasting rebuttal, the complexity of life forms does not disprove evolution. Once you understand evolution, increasing complexity and diversity of life over time is what you expect. The final 2 questions aren't really arguments against evolution at all. Has the person making this claim investigated the evidence for himself, asks the writer, apparently missing the irony that Jehovah's Witnesses are firmly dissuaded from investigating evidence that disproves their own beliefs. How many people believe in evolution simply because they have been told that intelligent people believe in it? Again, exactly the same can be said of Jehovah's Witnesses, who, we have learned in this very JW Broadcasting episode, are to be indoctrinated with Watchtower dogma from when they are fetuses. The final page in the section ironically begins by listing the very things that lead those raised as creationists to dismiss evolution, for emotional reasons, due to influence from others, and due to pressure from parents. But the brochure claims these are not factors for JWs, who actually have sound reasons for belief in God. A good example of how nonsensical and downright misleading these reasons are can be found in the blurb on the left, which is a quote from someone who almost certainly isn't called Teresa. When I'm in class listening to the teacher explain how our bodies function, there's no doubt in my mind that God exists. Each part of the body has its own function, down to the smallest detail, and these functions are often carried out without our awareness. The human body truly is mind-boggling. Actually, there are lots of examples of body parts that do not have a function or no longer have a function due to changes in humans since they first emerged. For example, the appendix may have had a purpose back when humans had a strictly plant-based diet, But these days the only thing it's good at doing is getting inflamed and infected before finally rupturing when someone gets appendicitis. The appendix is just one of 10 body parts with either non-existent or negligible uses listed in this article on the Medical Daily website. As a parting shot, the reader is asked to think about the following. Despite decades of research, scientists have yet to come up with an explanation for evolution that they can all agree on. If scientists can't agree on evolution, and they're supposed to be the experts, are you wrong to question the theory? This is what is commonly known as a red herring, a deliberate diversion of attention with the intention of trying to obscure or abandon the original argument. Though scientists do indeed disagree on the precise details and mechanisms of how evolution works, the fact that evolution is real and influencing the development of life on Earth as we speak is not in any question in the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community. And the fact that scientists do doubt, challenge and question each other is actually a good thing, something science can be proud of. Rather than rigidly sticking to just one narrow understanding or piece of dogma, science constantly pushes itself to better its understanding of how the universe works, rewarding itself for coming up with new explanations that dismantle previously held misconceptions.
This brochure is already approved for translation into 324 languages. Of these languages, 223 do not produce Awake, and 262 have not produced the Young People Ask book. So we expect that answers to 10 questions young people ask will help many more youths benefit from the Bible's practical wisdom.
I find this fascinating. So 223 languages don't have Awake magazines, and 262 languages don't have Young People Ask books. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that the number of languages that Watchtower caters for is impressive. I mean, let's face it, the jw.org website is available in goodness knows how many languages, and when you actually run a website, you understand the logistics that are involved in making a website multilingual. So it is genuinely impressive, the number of languages that Watchtower caters for. Obviously, all of these languages are only available because of free cult labour, but that's beside the point. That said, it's one thing to cater to a lot of languages. It's another thing entirely to aspire to reach out to everybody on the same planet with the same message on which people's very lives are supposed to depend. Because when you have a disparity in language distribution or in language translation, you also have a disparity in what that religion means to different languages. So, for example, here in Croatia, there's lots of books and there's lots of so-called spiritual food that local witnesses just haven't read or haven't heard of. They don't know about Beth Sarim or Russell's Pyramidology because the Jehovah's Witnesses Kingdom Proclaimers book isn't available in their language. Which begs the question, if Jehovah is so interested in drawing people from all languages to him, regardless of where they come from, why is it that being a Jehovah's Witness is a different experience depending on which part of the world you happen to come from and which language you speak? Why is it that you can only have full access to the faithful and discreet slave's spiritual food if you speak English or one of the other languages that have availability for all publications? Just a little something to think about. Anyway, that's about all I have for this month's rebuttal. I'm sorry it's such a long video, but there was lots of stuff to get through, so hopefully you've been able to watch it at your leisure or watch it in bits or whatever works best for you. Anyway, I hope you found this enjoyable, and as always, thank you for watching.
What do you think?